Our story unfolds on a trip meant to bring friends and family closer, a retreat into the heart of nature where the warmth of old friendships mingled with the crisp forest air. We were three families, bound not just by years of companionship but by a shared history stretching back to our college days. Most of us were of the same age, except for two wives who were younger than their husbands. Among them was me, Sandra, traveling with my husband, Jean, and our lively 8-year-old twins. One couple had a sweet 7-year-old daughter, while the other had two sons, aged 7 and 8. It was a well-matched group, a balance of adults seeking relaxation and children eager for adventure. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic trip, hidden beneath years of polite smiles and shared laughter, there lingered a quiet longing I had almost forgotten, a desire I had buried long ago but never truly let go of. Tom had always intrigued me, ever since our university years. Back then, fate had played its part cruelly, as by the time we met, he was already committed to someone else. So I had swallowed my feelings, moved on, found love elsewhere. Or at least, I thought I had. Time had a way of dulling the fire of passion, and what once felt like an exciting new chapter with my husband had eventually settled into the predictable routine of marriage. Jean, the man I had once adored, had changed over the years. He no longer cared for his appearance the way he used to, no longer held himself with the confidence that had first drawn me to him. Meanwhile, Tom had only grown more charming, more successful. He held a high-ranking position in a local company, carried himself with a quiet authority, and still dressed impeccably, a sharp contrast to the man I now called my husband. It was during these rare trips that old feelings would stir once more, hidden beneath the surface but impossible to ignore. Out in the open, among friends and family, I could only allow myself fleeting moments, a lingering glance, a casual touch in passing, an exchange of words that carried a deeper meaning than anyone else could suspect. But this trip would be different. This trip would change everything. We arrived at our campsite in the late afternoon, the forest humming with life around us. Setting up the tents was a familiar ritual, followed by the scent of grilled meat filling the air and the clinking of glasses as we indulged in good food and even better company. The children played nearby, wrapped in blankets, their laughter a soft backdrop to our conversations. The night deepened, the campfire casting flickering shadows across our faces. As the drinks flowed, inhibitions loosened, and when my husband suggested we retire for the night, I told him I wanted to stay by the fire a little longer. He kissed my forehead, trusting me as he always did, and disappeared into our tent. Tom lingered. He had escorted his wife to bed moments before, her steps unsteady from too much wine. And now, we were alone. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged. An invisible thread stretched taut between us. Years of unspoken words, of missed opportunities, of buried desire simmering just beneath the surface. I invited him to sit beside me on the blanket, and he did. The firelight danced in his eyes as he looked at me, his gaze lingering a little too long. And then, in a voice low and deliberate, he began to speak. He told me how he had always dreamed of me, how even after all these years, I was still more beautiful to him than his wife. His words wrapped around me like a spell, intoxicating and irresistible. The rational part of my mind whispered warnings, but my heart had already surrendered. The moment unfolded like a scene from a novel, set against the backdrop of the whispering trees and the crackling fire. But just as passion took hold, the illusion of secrecy shattered. A rustling from one of the tents broke the spell. Vincent, one of our friends, emerged from his tent, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He had simply risen to relieve himself, but as he neared the fire, his gaze landed on us. A knowing smirk crossed his face, and then, nothing. He said nothing, just continued on his way, offering us the gift of his silence. But our stolen moment was not to last. A second figure appeared, this time from Tom's tent. Olivia, his wife. Unlike Vincent, she did not pretend not to see. She did not look away. She did not keep quiet. Though she had the presence of mind not to wake the children with a scream, the fury in her voice was unmistakable. With a sharp intake of breath, she turned and stormed toward my husband's tent. And then, just like that, the night, our night, was over. The night had unraveled in ways none of us could have foreseen. In the haze of moonlight and flickering embers, What had begun as a quiet indulgence in long-buried desires had erupted into something far more destructive. Olivia's voice, sharp and laced with anger, cut through the fragile silence that had lingered in the aftermath of our mistake. My husband, still groggy and irritated at being woken, struggled to comprehend what was happening. His confusion lasted only moments before reality set in. Tom and I had already begun to sober up, the weight of our actions crashing down on us like an unforgiving tide. Olivia's fury knew no bounds as she turned to the only other woman she believed should know, the sleeping Ina. She called for her, shaking her in an attempt to rouse her from the depths of drunken oblivion. But Ina, lost to her intoxication, barely stirred. Perhaps it was for the best. When morning came and clarity returned, explanations could be offered with fewer raw emotions. But clarity had already arrived for my husband. I saw the moment realization dawned in his eyes, the way his confusion twisted into hurt, then into rage. Without hesitation, he strode toward Tom, his fists clenched at his sides. The force of his punch sent Tom stumbling back, blood rushing to the surface of his skin in an angry bloom. But my husband wasn't finished. Before I could react, his hands were on me, fingers tangling in my hair as he dragged me into our tent, shutting the world out behind us. I expected yelling, accusations hurled like daggers into the suffocating air between us. But instead, he simply sat, burying his head in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was low, tired, not just from lack of sleep but from years of disappointment, of love eroded by time and neglect. His words cut deeper than any shouted insults ever could. He listed every regret, every wasted year, every moment we had lost to routine and resentment. He spoke of the love he had given me, of the sacrifices he had made, of how little he had asked for in return. I listened, silent. Not because I had no words, but because I had none that could undo the damage. Only now did I understand the gravity of what I had done. Not just in that moment by the fire, but in the years that led to it. I had been selfish, blind. I had chased a fantasy without realizing that the life I had, imperfect as it was, had been built with love. And I had destroyed it in a single night. When morning came, the world outside felt cold, indifferent to the wreckage left in the wake of our actions. But there was no time to linger in the ruins. We had decisions to make, consequences to face. That evening, the four of us, my husband, Tom, Olivia, and I, sat together for the first time since it all began. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation. Just silence. A heavy, suffocating silence filled with unspoken pain. Olivia, still seething, attempted to insert herself into the conversation, offering bitter remarks, but we dismissed her quickly. This was not her battle to fight. She had already won. Tom's wife, Ina, surprised me with her restraint. There were no tears, no accusations. Just quiet acceptance, the kind that comes when heartbreak is too deep to be expressed in words. We did not discuss the possibility of salvaging our marriages. We knew better. Some betrayals cut too deep, leaving wounds that no amount of time or forgiveness could mend. In the end, the only choice left was to walk away. Divorce was inevitable. The only thing left to do was protect our children from the mess we had created. I told myself I had no regrets. That I had done what my heart had longed for. That now, at least, I had a chance to be with the man I had always wanted. And yet, deep inside, a gnawing unease refused to fade. Back home, my husband and I became strangers in the same house, bound only by our children. Tom, the man I had sacrificed everything for, remained in my life. I reached out, tried to hold on to him, believing that at least some part of this disaster had been worth it. But when I finally gathered the courage to ask him to meet, the truth unraveled like a cruel joke. Tom, with a look of quiet resignation, admitted that this was nothing new for him. He had done this before, many times. The same pattern, the same lies, the same destruction. I had not been special. I had simply been another name on a list of fleeting indulgences. The weight of his words shattered me. In my quest for something exciting, something different, I had gambled everything I had ever built, and I had lost. All that remained was regret. That night, I returned home, the walls of my once loving home now feeling foreign, hollow. My husband was there, quiet, distant. I fell to my knees before him, my voice breaking as I begged for his forgiveness, for a second chance. I told him I would do anything, that I had been blind to what I had, that I had been wrong in every way that mattered. He listened. And when I finished, he spoke. He told me he still loved me. That despite everything, his heart had not yet learned to hate me. But love was not enough. Some wounds, once inflicted, never fully heal. Some betrayals carve too deep a scar. And I had left him with one he would never be able to forget. I had lost the man who had truly been my home. I had shattered the foundation of a love that had been real, that had been strong enough to withstand everything, except this. Now, all I could do was live with the weight of my choices, hoping that time, in its slow and cruel way, might one day lessen the ache. But I knew the truth. Some mistakes can never be undone.